I said, according to that calendar, right now we live in the 13th, or the last back tune of the 13 back tune calendar. We live in the last 400 years, which is what a back tune is. Or, a back tune is also equal to 144,000 days. 13 divisions of 144,000 days. We live in the last 144,000 days of the Mayan long count. Does that number ring a bell to anyone who has studied Christianity at all? Revelation. Exactly. It's in the book of Revelation that we start to hear about the 7 seals being opened, Judgment Day. 6 seals are open, cataclysm everywhere. You know, worse than John Cusack could have ever imagined in that awful movie about 2012. But anyway, so I've never seen a movie where everything took place in a rear view mirror. You know, it's like he's just watching the whole world die in a rear view mirror. He's driving away from it. But okay, enough about that. So we're living in the last 144,000 days. Book of Revelation talks about the 6 seals. The 6 have been opened. The 7th is fixing to be opened. When an angel comes out of the east and tells the 4 winds, "Do not harm the inhabitants of the earth until I have sealed in the forehead the elect 144,000. And of course, my background being in biblical studies, we've always understood that in large part to mean that the 144,000 are the predetermined by God. To be sealed in the forehead means to bring them to their ultimate point of completion. Right? Think about when you seal something. If you seal a letter that you're sending, a bill, do you seal it before you put the check in or after? You seal it before. Whatever you did, in the old days when we used to use a wax seal, that was a document to say that this is complete as it is. If the seal's broken, then we can't be responsible for what's in there. But the seal says it's complete. To seal in the forehead is a redundant way of saying to seal it in its absolute most perfect form of completion. Okay. The Maya used a counting system that's based on 20. We use one based on 10 called the decimal system. Theirs is called the vigesimal system, and it's based on 20. 20, 40, 60, 80. That's how they counted. So when the Maya looked at a number, or were dealing with a number like 144,000, they looked at it this way. How many times does 20 go into 144,000? 7 times, right? 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 20 is 144. The zeros are just placement numbers. So 7 is 140 with a remainder of 4. Okay? That's how the Maya, in their dot bar notation, which we won't get into, there's no need to, but they would write 144,000 very much like this, 7 units of 20 and 4 remaining, and of course 3 place digits. What's interesting about this, and the only reason I bring it up, is because aside from the fact that there does seem to be a correlation between the Maya saying that the last 144,000 days of their calendar portends to some great event in the consciousness of mankind and creation as a whole. And the book of Revelation seems to be saying the same thing. What's really freaky, though, is that the exact chapter and verse from the book of Revelation that mentions the 144,000 specifically is Revelation 7:4. Ta-da! Okay. Just fun stuff. Like I said, for the Maya, time is about synchronicity. So wherever you see coincidences, I see synchronicity. Okay? And after this presentation, And if you start to look into things a little bit more, I'll warn you, look out, because you're going to start to see things recurring over and over and over again. It's creation's way of pointing out to us the direction we're going. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to my 9-level pyramid. Okay. We are going into the world of the Bolantiku, the 9 lords of death, or the 9 lords of the underworld, or just the 9 lords of time, as the Maya really knew of them. Those other names, death and underworld, were given by Western scholars that came across the Maya. And in fact, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a lot of things about the Maya that, as they have been doing all this archaeology, that they simply didn't understand and had to shelve. Keep that in mind for a second. So, we're talking about Mayan cosmology here, their belief about creation. They saw creation as taking place over 9 different cycles. Each cycle taking place 20 times faster than the one before it. So as you move up in each of the 9 levels of creation, the amount of time in each one is shortened by a factor of 20. And you'll see that in just a second. I'm just laying out some basics for us here. So 9 levels of creation. And they also saw, working with this in harmony, or in synchronization with this, 13 heavens is what the Maya called it. Something probably very familiar to any of you that have studied, maybe you've watched a documentary from Joseph Campbell on PBS, or any studying of almost any other ancient religions. The idea of 13 heavens is a familiar one. We are much more familiar with it as the 7 days of creation. Where have we heard that before? Book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, in fact, is the 7 days of creation. There's also 6 nights to those 7 days. That's represented so brilliantly by my little starry nights there. Everybody got that? 7 days and 6 nights of creation. 7 plus 6 is 13. 13 heavens. 13 sound familiar yet? 13, 20? 13 heavens, 13 levels of creation, or 13 stages of creation. I'll get to that in a second. 9 levels of creation, each one working 20 times faster than the other. So, in other words, what I'm fixing to show you on the galactic scale, all right, on an individual scale, the Tzolk'in, 13, 20. 13 columns going this way, 20 columns going this way. Don't try to make notes of it. I'm just showing it to you. This is for a person. This is for an individual. This is how 1320 works at the level of the universe, creation as a whole. So let's dive in. 13 levels, or heavens, 13 heavens, 7 days of creation, 7 days, 6 nights. All right. This is a pattern that exists in all of nature, in everything that we can possibly look at. We see that if it has any sort of evolution, it follows basically 13 phases. All right. Perhaps the best way to think about it is to use the agricultural analogy. All right. So we talk about the first day. The first day is the seed in the ground. Seed is in the ground. Whatever that seed is, it's there. The second day begins germination. Actually, the first night and then the second day, until we get to the sprout. And of course, during this second day period here, and we're not talking about literal days. Again, these are phases that we're talking about. Just like Genesis chapter 1 isn't talking about 7 actual 24-hour periods that it took God to create the universe, because it's not a manual on how to create a universe in 7 days, right? The book of Genesis came to us from, guess who? Sumer.
That's right.
The book of Genesis is based on a much earlier creation story that had been around for a long time. The 7 days and 6 nights of creation in there were based on the 7 days and 6 nights of creation from creation stories all over, but originating back in Sumer. The Hebrews had the forethought, though, to change it around, and instead of it being the responsibility of many gods battling each other and throwing their corpses into the air to create the stars and all that, they said it was one God that did it, and He made it all. And so, but it was an earlier story. So these, again, they're familiar things, okay? You get to the sprout level here in day 2. And this is where you begin to see polarity. This is where you see the first 2 leaves, right?
Probably.
The appearance of duality or polarity, right, wrong, good versus evil. But we know that really to be a myth because the 2 are part of one. You move to the 3rd day and night. This is where you have a lot of new growth, and you actually have what type of plant it's going to be is defined now. If it's going to be a tomato or an okra, or if it's a daffodil or whatever, by this time you know what that is, what it's going to be. You get to the 4th day. The pattern has been set, and now replication begins to take place, and it takes place like crazy, right? The plant just starts to replicate and get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We get to the 5th day and the 5th night, and something really interesting happens. At this phase of a plant or any other organism that you want to choose, you take this with humans. For humans, this is about the time of puberty. Okay? This is the time when the bud or the flower, depending on what it's going to be, starts to appear. During this 5th day, something completely new, not seen before yet, had been inside, but now it's starting to come out. And what happens is that as that bud comes out, let's say if it's a fruit or a vegetable, it starts with a flower, and then as the fruit itself begins to come out, what happens? The flower falls away. If it's a flower, it comes out in a pod or some similar thing, and what happens? The pod is ejected in order to let the flower out. This is 5th day and 5th night kind of happenings. 6th day and night is full flowering. The flower, whatever it is now in its most beautiful. The fruit, whatever it has grown. So that by the 7th day, whatever that plant is, okra in this case, because we're in Texas and I love okra, okay? Yeah. By this time, we've seen it go through all of these phases. Sprout, moving up, the old sprouts kicked off, new growth, massive replication. We get up to this 5th day, and now we're starting to see something new happen. The flowers that it had that were pretty are gone, but there's this little bitty thing there, and it's growing, and by the 7th day, that thing's ready to pick and ready to eat. It's ripe. It's complete. Thus why the number 7 has such significance in religious history